What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Top breakout at each position. I'll be looking at quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, running back today, giving you one potential breakout for each. A few rules before we start. Not going to be including rookies since we've been going over them a lot and it's a little bit too easy to include them. Second rule is no one going in the first 4 rounds. Everyone knows those players are good, so it doesn't help all that much. And while there are definitely going to be players who break out in that range, I kind of wanted to focus on more the middle and late rounds in this one. So those are the only rules, and let's start things off with the stats of the day. Yesterday's stat was which running back averaged the least time behind the line of scrimmage last season. The answer was Jamal Williams, and Connor Andrews was the first to get that one right. Today's stat: from week 5 on last season, which wide receiver led the league in market share of their team's air yards? All right, let's start off with quarterback, and we've got Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, I think my actual answer would be Teddy Bridgewater for this, but I've talked about him in a number of videos recently, so I'll bring him up. I think Teddy's an awesome breakout, but I want to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo in this one. I think he's going to have a really, really nice season, and yet very few people are looking to draft him, especially after this Deebo Samuel injury. But I think that's a mistake. Kyle Shanahan was interviewed recently, and he talked about Jimmy G last season and what he thinks about him moving forward into these next few years. And a big thing that he mentioned was not feeling like he needed to overload him to start the season last year. They felt like their defense was playing great and they had a fantastic ground game. And so there was no need to just unleash Jimmy, especially since, if you remember, he was returning from a torn ACL. And players can be recovered from it, but not fully willing to just go, right? Like, you got your Adrian Petersons, they recover from their ACL injury and they're just dominant. But a lot of players don't fully trust the knee in these first few games back. And so he didn't want to put too much pressure on Garoppolo to just go out there and win games. He wanted to say, listen, we have an awesome defense, an awesome ground game. Let's try and win with that to start the season. And hopefully come mid-season, they can lean a little bit more on Garoppolo. And so if you look at the first 8 weeks, he only had 28.7 dropbacks per game because, again, they didn't want him to be featured. Compare that to week 9 on, and he jumps to 34.7 per game. And that might not seem like a lot, but 6 extra dropbacks per game are going to add up across a full season. And so we also need to remember that was really his first full season. He backed up Brady for the first 3 years of his career. Then he made 5 starts in 2017 after he was traded from New England to San Fran. And he averaged 308 passing yards per game, by the way, in those 5 games. Then he tears his ACL in week 3 of 2018. And then last season, of course, is his first time as just the full starter for all 16 weeks. Throws for almost 4,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 8.4 yards per attempt, which is very impressive. I want to bring up the ADOT. I know a lot of you will mention that to be like, listen, he's just a dink and dump guy. He doesn't have a deep ADOT. Yeah, his ADOT is very low. It actually ranked 37th among the 42 quarterbacks with at least 100 attempts last season. But it was low by design. That's how this offense works. They get the ball into the hands of their playmakers. And they design plays that are going to leave a lot of upside for yards after the catch. So yes, the passes were very short, but he completed most of them, and his receivers were given a chance to have a lot of yards after the catch. And who does he have to throw to? He's still got Kittle to throw to. We think Deebo is probably going to miss maybe like a month. I mean, we can't know right now, but he's going to miss some time. But Brandon Ayuk is fantastic after the catch. That's why they drafted him so early. So they still have players that can be good while Deebo's injured, and then Deebo's going to come back and he's going to be great. So ultimately for this season, I do expect them to expand his role in the offense, talking about more pass attempts per game. And I think that they are going to have more games where they are competitive because their defense was so fantastic last season. Maybe takes a step back. It's not sticky year over year. Defenses aren't typically just elite every single season. So maybe they're a little bit less elite than last year, which is going to lead to more pass attempts because if they can't run the ball every single play in the second half, in half of their games, then he's going to need to throw more. And given that he did rank 7th in fantasy points per attempt and fantasy points per dropback, if you give him more attempts, that's much better than giving a less efficient quarterback more attempts. So even if you only give him a few more pass attempts per game, he does a lot in fantasy for each of these pass attempts, and so it's going to benefit him more. And plus, you can get him in the final round of every draft. And even if you listen to everything I just said and you're like, I still don't think he's going to be that great all year, guess what? You can test it out because you're taking him in the final round. Maybe you're only looking to stream, and he opens the season against the Cardinals, the Jets, and the Giants. Those are 3 cupcake matchups and 3 games that have a potential to be higher scoring. I'd say the Jets one, probably not. But against the Cardinals and the Giants, those could be higher scoring games. So he might need to throw the ball a lot. And honestly, Cardinals, perfect. Like opening the season against the Cardinals, that is an epic matchup. He should have to throw the ball a decent amount. And so you're going to see right away, is he a good pick? At tight end, we've got 3 pretty clear options in my eyes. You've got Hayden Hurst, TJ Hawkinson, and Noah Fant. None of these guys have really broken out yet, but all of them have very clear paths to having a great season. Given the situation, though, I would rank them from most likely to least likely to break out as Hurst, Hawkinson, and Fant. I still love Fant. I still have him as a top target, but he does have more competition for targets and by far the worst quarterback of the group. Then Hawkinson is obviously just a freak athletically, and he's got Stafford throwing him the ball, but I just can't get over the potential target share that Hurst is going to have. And not only the target share, but the size of the pie, right? Because it's one thing having an 18% target share on the Bills passing attack, but Hooper had an 18.5% target share on the number 1 passing volume offense in football. And that's the role that Hurst is stepping into. And again, there are no other tight ends to threaten his role. If you think that there's even a chance that there's a backup tight end on the Falcons roster that's going to take passing down snaps away from Hurst, forget that. It is not going to happen. Hurst is the guy, and this is an extremely fantasy-friendly role. And also, if you're worried about maybe how Matt Ryan feels about him, don't worry about that either, because in an interview, Matt Ryan said he's the fastest and most athletic tight end he's ever played with. And we obviously know he's played with Tony Gonzalez. So I understand that people are a little bit hesitant about drafting him because maybe they think he's bad. But the Falcons are going to throw the ball 40 times a game. So if you don't think he's going to be heavily involved, then you better be drafting all of Julio, Ridley, and Gurley, because that trio is going to need to average at least 160 targets each. And then you'd still have like 10 extra targets each week to divvy to players who aren't Hayden Hurst. I don't see how that's even possible. Like, especially because I just gave Gurley 160 targets, which is not going to happen. Like, Gurley's obviously not going to have that many. So Hurst easily is going to see enough volume to be a tight end 1. And so as long as he's not absolutely dreadful, he's going to be a tight end 1. And he's not going as a tight end 1. And this is a breakout video. Easily has the chance to be a top 5 tight end. And there are very few tight ends going where Hurst is and later that even have that in their range of outcomes. But he does. So I think he is a fantastic pick this season. But also, guys I mentioned too, Hawkinson and Fant. Love those as well. My top wide receiver breakout would probably be DK Metcalf, but I broke him down last week, and he's going sort of early. Obviously, I like McLaurin and Chark as well. I made that video about all of them, but you could argue that both of them kind of already broke out. I don't know. I didn't want to get into like a naming dispute with you guys, so those are obviously some of my favorite picks in the middle rounds, but I didn't want to talk about them because I just did, and they were going a little bit early. So we're going to talk about Will Fuller in this one. I know he's super controversial, and half of you just refuse to draft him out of principle or something, but you cannot possibly deny his upside. DeAndre Hopkins has averaged 166 targets per season over the last 5 years. Just think about that. That is over 10 targets per game for 5 years. Removing that opens up so much opportunity. And then you consider how much we expect them to throw this season, because their win total is only 7.5 games. They've been 11-5 and 10-6 over the last 2 years, which means they've had plenty of games where they could run the ball in the second half. But that's not expected to be the case this year. And so when we consider who their quarterback is, the upside's unreal. I mean, think about it. When has Deshaun Watson disappointed us? He just never has. Whenever they're barely down late in games, like when they're down, 30 late in games, it's tough for him to come back. But when it's even remotely possible, Deshaun Watson just always does it. He just always produces. He always hits his targets, even when his targets haven't been that good. Obviously, he's had DeAndre Hopkins, but he's made comebacks late in games utilizing other players as well. And so if we expect them to have a lot of games where they're behind in the second half, at least a lot more compared to what they have been recently, that is very, very beneficial to a guy like Will Fuller, especially in a limited offseason, because Watson's going to have a lot less opportunity to get on the same page as Cooks. I just think people are overweighing the injuries with Fuller. Yeah, he's very, very likely to suffer at least one injury during the season. But I don't care about where you finish in total fantasy points at the end of the year. All I care about is per game and capturing upside, especially in the 8th round. So I'd much rather target a player who's going to get 15 points per game in 10 games than a player who's going to get 10 points per game in 16 games. It's like, ooh, yeah, he played all the games, but he only had 10 points per game. So yeah, he scored 10 more across all 16, but I want the dude who was averaging 15 a game in the 10 weeks that he played, because I can find a replacement when he's hurt, but when he's not hurt, he's a big difference maker, and he's outperforming what it cost to get him. So Fuller has the opportunity and the talent for sure to have a true breakout season. And just one final note on this. He's going in the 8th round, right? It just on average in most drafts. So what do we say about risk once we hit the 5th round and on? We say every single round we care less and less about how risky a player is. We want more and more what their upside is. And realistically, after like the 7th or 8th round, we completely throw risk out the door and we're just looking for upside. What do we also know about the fantasy football market? We know it's relatively efficient, right? With so many sites out there and so many resources for players to have, ADP come mid-August is extremely accurate. Each player's value represents a pretty realistic combination of their upside, their floor, and their risk. But, like I said, we don't care about risk come the 8th round. So would it not make sense to target players who are only going that late because of the risk? Think about what I just said. I mean, if a player is only going late because they're risky, but we don't care about the risk at that point, then they're going too late. And conversely, if a player is going late because they have no risk, so they're going the 8th round because they have absolutely no risk, it also means they have no upside. Because if they have no risk and upside, they'd be going earlier in the 8th round. But since we don't care about targeting a safe player, we want upside, then why would you pay a premium for a player who's safe? That wouldn't make sense. Again, 2 players going in the 8th round. One's risky but has a lot of upside. One's safe but has no upside. And I don't care about risk. I'm only looking at upside. One has upside and one doesn't. Why would I target the player who is safe? That makes no sense. You target Will Fuller. So that's just my thought on players like Will Fuller, because there are plenty of them. We're going after those guys. I'm not taking Will Fuller in the 4th round. That makes no sense. But in the 8th round, absolutely. Final position today is running back, and the top breakout is Damien Harris. One thing I want to make abundantly clear. Yes, Sony Michel has been placed on the PUP. This is the active PUP. It does not mean that he's going to miss the first 6 games, and especially with no preseason, this basically means nothing, okay? Do not look too much into him being on the PUP. He can come off it whenever they feel like it, and they're not doing anything right now, so it doesn't really matter that he's on it. I just want to be very clear on that because people are going to see, oh, he was placed in the PUP. They're going to be like, wow, he's missing the first month and a half? No, he could, but we're not guaranteed that's going to happen right now. What it does do is open up that possibility. There is a possibility, since we've heard nothing about his recovery from this foot surgery. Remember, he had foot surgery in May. We don't know why he had the foot surgery. We don't know how he's recovering from it. At least this gives some indication he's probably not 100% recovered. And given that Damien Harris was a pretty decent prospect coming out of Alabama, and the Pats have said plenty of times that they are still very high on him. I know it didn't work out last year. That doesn't change his upside for this year. They should have a pretty efficient ground game now that Cam Newton is the quarterback. And there have been plenty of seasons where the Patriots lead back becomes a league winner. And almost never was it the first Patriots running back drafted. You look back at Dion Lewis, your LeGarrette Blunts, they were not the first drafted running backs on the teams. Even the season that James White was like the running back 7, these guys were not the first running back taken. It was always someone going late that just happened to get the opportunity in the second half of the season and just dominated. So when we also consider, let's be honest, Sony Michel has been trash. I mean, he's got a truly terrible true yards per carry, an extremely low breakaway run percentage. He's a 0 in the passing game. He's wildly inefficient. He is just not a player that they should be leaning on as the featured back in their offense. And obviously he hasn't been the featured back. They've had James White, but there's no reason the Patriots should be giving him between 200 and 250 carries in a season. There is absolutely no reason that they should not try out Damien Harris this season and see what they have in him. So given that the Patriots are not a dumb organization, Harris is going to have an opportunity at some point, but he's not being drafted like it. He's being drafted like he is 100% going to be the backup for the entire season and will only have a role if Sony Michel gets injured. But let's be honest, Sony Michel gets injured all the time. His knees are definitely not fresh. That's going to catch up with him at some point, and there's a chance that they're just like, let's see what we have in Harris. Oh, look, he's actually very good. Let's roll with him. And if that happens, look out. So, those are the biggest breakouts at each position. If you want to see my full list of targets as well as the players that I'll be avoiding, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about hitting that subscribe button if you're new? But thanks for watching.